In the course of life, we are drawn into some kind of activities, which need courage, determination, intelligence and physical strength of a higher order. The attempt of mankind, to reach inaccessible places, such as the highest peaks of mountains, is such an activity. Now, let us read the story of a mountaineer and explorer, Sir Edmund Hillary. Sir Edmund Hillary, the lanky New Zealand mountaineer and explorer, won worldwide acclaim in 1953 by becoming the first to scale the 29,035-foot summit of Mount Everest, the world's tallest peak, with Tenzing Norgay, the Sherpa. In the annals of great heroic exploits, the conquest of Mount Everest by Sir Edmund and Norgay ranks with the first trek to the South Pole, by Roald Amundsen in 1911, and the first non-stop transatlantic flight by Charles A. Lindbergh in 1927. By 1953, nearly a century after British surveyors had established that the Himalayan peak, on the Nepal-Tibet border, was the highest point on the earth, many climbers considered the mountain all but unconquerable. The summit was 5.5 vertical miles above sea level, up where today's jets fly. An otherworldly place of yawning crevasses, and 100-mile-an-hour winds, of perpetual cold, and air so thin, that the human brain and lungs do not function properly in it. Numerous Everest expeditions had failed. Dozens of experienced mountaineers, including many Sherpas, the Nepalese people famed as climbers, had been killed, buried in avalanches, or lost and frozen in sudden storms that roared over the dizzying escarpments. One who vanished in 1924 was George Lee Mallory. When he was asked why he tried to climb Everest, he answered, "Because it is there." His body was found in the ice 75 years later, in 1999, about 2,000 feet below the summit. Sir Edmund and Norgay were part of a Royal Geographical Society Alpine Club expedition, led by Colonel Henry Cecil John Hunt. A siege group that included a dozen climbers, 35 Sherpa guides and 350 porters, carrying 18 tons of food and equipment. Their route was the treacherous South Tor, facing Nepal. After a series of climbs by coordinated teams to establish higher camps on the icy slopes and perilous rock ledges, Tom Bourdillon and Dr. Charles Evans were the first team to attempt the summit. They gave up at 28,720 feet, 315 feet from the top. Beaten back by exhaustion, a storm that shrouded them in ice, and oxygen tank failures. At 6:30 a.m. on May 29, 1953, cheered by clearing skies, they began the final attack. Carrying enough oxygen for 7 hours, and hoping to pick up 2 partly filled tanks left by Evans and Bourdillon, they moved out, roped together, cutting toe holds, with their ice axes, first one man leading, and then the other. They inched up a steep, knife-edged ridge, southeast of the summit. Halfway up, Sir Edmund discovered soft snow under them. Immediately, he realized that they were on dangerous ground. Suddenly, with a dull breaking noise, an area of crust all around him about 6 feet in diameter broke off. He slid backward 20 or 30 feet before regaining a hold. It was a nasty shock. He could look down 10,000 feet between his legs. Farther up, they encountered what was later named the Hillary Step, a sheer face of rock and ice 40 feet high, that Sir Edmund called the most formidable obstacle on the ridge. But they found a vertical crack, and managed to climb it, by bracing feet against one side, and backs against the other. The last few yards to the summit were relatively easy. As he chipped steps, he wondered how long they could keep it up. Then he realized that the ridge, instead of rising ahead, now dropped sharply away. He looked upward to see a narrow ridge, running up to a sharp point. A few more whacks of the ice axe, and they stood on the summit. The vast panorama of the Himalayas lay before them. Fleecy clouds, and the pastel shades of Tibet to the north, and in all directions, sweeping ranks of jagged mountains, cloud-filled valleys, great natural amphitheaters of snow and rock, and the glittering Kongshan Glacier 10,000 feet below. There was a modest celebration. They shook hands, and then, casting Anglo-Saxon formalities aside, they thumped each other on the back until forced to stop from lack of breath. They took photographs, and left a crucifix for Hunt, the expedition leader. Norgay, a Buddhist, buried biscuits and chocolate, as an offering to the gods of Everest. Then they ate a mint cake, strapped on their oxygen tanks, and began the climb down. 4 days later, the news was flashed around the world as a coronation gift of sorts, to Queen Elizabeth II, who was crowned in Westminster Abbey, on June 2, 1953. The Queen promptly made Edmund Hillary, a Knight Commander, of the Order of the British Empire, while Norgay received the George Medal of Britain, and other honors. Worldwide heroes overnight, they were greeted by huge crowds in India and London. A controversy over whether Sir Edmund or Norgay had been first to stand on the summit threatened briefly to mar the celebrations. But Hunt declared that they reached it together as a team. Sir Edmund continued his life of adventure, climbing mountains, and once crossing the Antarctic continent, lecturing, and making public appearances. And serving as New Zealand's High Commissioner to India, Bangladesh and Nepal from 1985 to 1988. In more than 5 decades since the first successful assault, on what climbers call, the top of the world. More than 3,000 people, including Sir Edmund's son, Peter, and Norgay's son, Jamling, have reached the summit of Everest. While more than 200 have died in the attempt, 8 of them died in a 1996 expedition that was savaged by a blizzard. Today, Everest expeditions are almost commonplace. On a single day in 2003, 118 people were reported to have made it. Some veteran climbers have criticized the commercialism and circus atmosphere surrounding Everest climbing. Tough, raw-boned, 6 feet 5 inches tall, with a long leathery and wrinkled face, Sir Edmund was an intelligent, but unsophisticated man, with tigerish confidence on a mountain. But little taste for formal social doings. For many years after the Everest climb, he continued to list his occupation as beekeeper, his father's pursuit, and he preferred to be known as Ed. During the Southern Hemisphere summer of 1957-58, a British Commonwealth team that included Sir Edmund crossed the Antarctic on an overland route that traversed the South Pole. No one had attained the South Pole since Amundsen in 1911, and no one had ever crossed Antarctica. In 1960, Sir Edmund led a highly publicized but unsuccessful search for the abominable snowman. In 1977, he led a jetboat expedition, titled Ocean to Sky, from the mouth of the Ganges River to its source. In 1985, accompanied by Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon, Sir Edmund flew a twin-engine ski plane over the Arctic and landed at the North Pole. He thus became the first to stand at both poles and on the summit of Everest. In 2007, he was reported to have suffered a fall during his visit to Kathmandu. Sir Edmund wrote, or was a co-author of 13 books, including No Latitude for Error, 1961, Hodder and Stoughton, about the Antarctic experience. He also formed a foundation, the Sir Edmund Hillary Himalayan Trust, which raised millions, and built schools, clinics, airfields, and other facilities for the Sherpa villages in Nepal. For many years, Sir Edmund was president of New Zealand's Peace Corps, and an important voice in his country's conservation efforts. Edmund Percival Hillary was born on July 20, 1919, in Tuakau, near Auckland, the son of Percival Augustus Hillary and Gertrude Clark Hillary. His father was a commercial beekeeper, and Edmund and his younger brother, Rexford, worked on the family farm. Edmund began climbing as a youth, while attending public schools in Auckland. He went to Auckland University, and served in the Royal New Zealand Air Force, as a navigator, during World War II. After the war, he took climbing instruction from leading alpinists, and began to specialize in ice climbing techniques. He climbed in the Swiss Alps, and got to know British mountaineers with Himalayan experience. He began climbing peaks of more than 20,000 feet in Nepal. As his reputation grew, Hunt chose him as a member of the 1953 expedition that conquered Everest. Using Global Positioning System equipment, an expedition sponsored by the National Geographic Society and others, revised the elevation of the summit upward by 7 feet. From 29,028 to 29,035 feet. Standing atop that pinnacle in 1953 was an experience Sir Edmund would recollect many times, in lectures and quiet conversations. The whole world around us lay spread out like a giant relief map, he told one interviewer. I am a lucky man. I have had a dream, and it has come true. And that is not a thing that happens often to men. He died of heart failure in 2008.